In 1934, a gleaming silver bullet streaked across the American Midwest at speeds that seemed impossible for a train. The Pioneer Zephyr didn't just break records, it shattered everything people thought they knew about railroad travel. But here's what most people don't realize. The Zephyr's incredible success created a problem so big that Burlington had to build an entirely new locomotive to solve it. And that locomotive, designed specifically to carry the Zephyr legacy into the future, has been almost completely forgotten by history. Built by the Budd Company using Edward Budd's revolutionary shot-welded stainless steel construction, the lightweight streamliner proved that American railroads could compete with automobiles and airplanes on speed, comfort, and style. Within months, the Zephyr was touring the country, drawing massive crowds at every stop. Over 2 million people saw it at the Century of Progress exposition in Chicago alone. The media coverage was unprecedented for a railroad vehicle. Newspapers across the country ran front-page stories about the Silver Streak. Radio stations provided live coverage of the record run. Newsreels showed the Zephyr's sleek profile racing across the prairie. The train appeared in Hollywood films and inspired countless magazine articles about the future of transportation. Burlington's publicity department had orchestrated a marketing campaign that turned a railroad equipment demonstration into a national phenomenon. The Zephyr's success triggered a streamliner arms race across American railroading. The Pennsylvania Railroad promoted its new GG1 electrics as its answer to modern high-speed rail, operating them at sustained speeds of around 80 to 90 miles per hour, fast enough to keep public attention focused on East Coast electrification rather than Burlington's diesel breakthrough. The New York Central introduced the Mercury in 1936, a streamlined steam train rebuilt from existing equipment to give NYC a stylish, competitive entry in the growing streamliner trend. The Milwaukee Road was developing the Hiawatha, designed to outrun anything on rails with specially built steam locomotives capable of sustained 100 miles per hour operation. The Santa Fe was planning the Super Chief, combining transcontinental luxury with unprecedented speed. Railroad trade magazines filled with breathless comparisons of speed records, passenger amenities, and technological innovations as every major carrier scrambled to modernize their passenger service. But the Zephyr wasn't built for the booming post-Depression demand that followed its success. The original three-car consist could seat only 72 passengers. The entire three-car train set weighed just over 200,000 pounds and was powered by a single Winton 201A diesel engine producing about 600 horsepower. That engine was fast but notoriously unreliable, with bearing failures and crankcase problems that made scaling up that exact, tightly integrated concept a risky proposition for heavier, longer-distance services. As passenger demand surged, Burlington discovered that the Zephyr's compact size couldn't handle the growing ridership. When they tried to add cars, the single 600 horsepower engine struggled with the additional weight. Its low horsepower-to-weight ratio and mechanical drive system meant the Zephyr lost speed on even moderate grades, making it unsuitable for mountain routes across Colorado and Wyoming. The Zephyr used an articulated design, meaning each pair of cars shared a single Jacobs truck. Instead of every car having its own front and rear trucks, the cars depended on each other structurally. Adding a new car meant redesigning the entire train set rather than simply coupling on another coach. The engineering constraints were more complex than simple power limitations. The lightweight construction required careful weight distribution to maintain stability at high speeds, and every modification required extensive testing and recertification. Burlington faced a dilemma that would define the future of American passenger railroading. The Zephyr brand had become their most valuable marketing asset, but the actual Zephyr couldn't grow to meet demand. They needed to expand the concept into a full network of streamlined trains serving major routes across their system. The twin Zephyrs, launched in 1936 between Chicago and Minneapolis-St. Paul, proved the concept could work on multiple routes, but these longer trains required more powerful, more flexible locomotives that could handle varying consist lengths and challenging terrain. The railroad couldn't afford to fall behind in the streamliner race they had started. Burlington needed something bigger, more powerful, and ready for a nationwide streamliner network. So Burlington commissioned an all-new locomotive, built from the ground up to carry the Zephyr brand into the future. The locomotive Burlington chose was the EMD E5, and it was designed to be everything the Pioneer Zephyr wasn't: powerful, flexible, and production-ready for a nationwide streamliner network. Electro-Motive Division, which had supplied the Winton engine for the original Zephyr, adapted its early E-unit passenger locomotive platform to create the stainless-steel-clad E5 for the Burlington Route. No other railroad ordered this stainless-fluted variant, giving the E5 a uniquely close association with Burlington's Zephyr-branded trains. Each A unit was powered by two EMD 567A diesel engines, producing a combined 2,000 horsepower, more than 3 times the power of the original Zephyr's single engine. At 315,000 pounds, a single E5A unit weighed more than the entire original 3-car Pioneer Zephyr train set, underscoring how much heavier and more capable a true road locomotive had to be. The locomotive rode on two 3-axle trucks in an A1A arrangement, providing better weight distribution and traction than the Zephyr's lightweight power trucks. But the most telling detail was the E5's exterior. Burlington wrapped it in the same corrugated stainless steel fluting that had made the Zephyr famous. This wasn't just aesthetic, it was a deliberate signal to passengers that this locomotive represented the evolution of the Zephyr concept. The fluted stainless steel caught light the same way, created the same visual impression of speed even when standing still, and maintained the Zephyr's distinctive appearance that had become synonymous with modern railroad travel. The fluting process required specialized equipment and techniques that few manufacturers could handle. The stainless steel sheets had to be formed to precise dimensions to maintain structural integrity while creating the distinctive visual effect. Burlington insisted on the same grade of stainless steel used in the original Zephyr, despite the additional cost and manufacturing complexity. The railroad understood that visual continuity was essential to maintaining the Zephyr brand's impact. EMD delivered the first E5A units to Burlington in 1940, with additional units following through 1941. Burlington ordered them in both A and B configurations, with the B units providing additional power without cab controls. The railroad initially assigned them to premier services like the Denver Zephyr and the Twin Zephyrs, positioning them as the natural successors to the original Zephyr's role as Burlington's flagship power. The E5 represented Burlington's vision of Zephyr 2.0, a production-ready version of everything the Pioneer Zephyr had proved possible. Where the original Zephyr was an experimental train set that couldn't be easily modified, the E5 could pull consists of varying lengths depending on demand. Where the Zephyr was limited to relatively flat routes due to its low power, the E5 could handle the grades and curves of Burlington's expanding streamliner network. Where the Zephyr required specialized maintenance due to its unique construction, the E5 used standard EMD components that any diesel shop could service. For passengers stepping aboard an E5-powered train, the experience felt unmistakably powerful, yet subtly different from the revolutionary original. The dual 567 engines produced a deeper, more authoritative rumble than the original Zephyr's single power plant, a sound that resonated through the passenger cars with mechanical confidence. Train spotters noted the locomotive's impressive acceleration from station stops, particularly when pulling longer consists that would have overwhelmed the original Zephyr. The E5 could maintain 90 miles per hour on grades that would have forced the lightweight original to slow significantly. Inside the passenger cars, the ride was smooth and quiet, with the characteristic gentle sway of a well-balanced consist and the steady thrum of diesel power. Yet despite the improved performance, passengers reported that something intangible was missing: the revolutionary feeling that had made the original Zephyr seem like transportation from the future. Burlington believed they had solved the Zephyr problem. They had created a locomotive that could deliver Zephyr performance with the flexibility and reliability needed for a major railroad operation. The E5 wasn't experimental, it was meant to become the backbone of the entire Zephyr network, pulling every major streamlined train on the Burlington system. But the E5 was overshadowed almost immediately by locomotives that made it obsolete before it had a chance to prove itself. The problem wasn't that the E5 was a bad locomotive, it was that diesel technology was advancing so rapidly in the early 1940s that even a 2-year development cycle could leave a design behind. EMD introduced the E6 in 1942 with improved traction motors and better reliability. The E7, launched in 1945, kept the same 2,000 horsepower rating, but introduced the more reliable 567 B prime movers and improved electrical gear that made daily service far easier. The E8 increased output to 2,250 horsepower and benefited from refinements that improved reliability and parts interchangeability across EMD's growing fleet. World War II disrupted locomotive development in ways that sealed the E5's fate. Wartime production restrictions froze new locomotive orders for civilian railroads, preventing Burlington from upgrading or modifying their E5 fleet while the technology continued advancing. The War Production Board allocated locomotive manufacturing capacity to military needs, leaving civilian railroads operating with whatever equipment they had when the war began. Meanwhile, EMD used the war years productively, refining their designs based on feedback from railroads operating under extreme wartime conditions, with massive increases in both passenger and freight traffic. When locomotive production resumed after 1945, EMD had leapfrogged their earlier designs with dramatically improved models that incorporated wartime lessons. The E5, frozen in its 1940 configuration, suddenly seemed primitive compared to post-war alternatives. By 1940, American railroads had developed clear expectations for what diesel locomotives should deliver, and these expectations worked against the E5's exclusive design. Railroad executives wanted standardization above all else, locomotives with interchangeable parts that could be maintained at any major shop, regardless of which railroad owned them. They wanted modular power systems where multiple units could be coupled together and controlled from a single cab, allowing flexible consists for varying traffic demands. They wanted reduced training burdens for shop crews, who could then work on any railroad's equipment without specialized knowledge. Most importantly, they wanted parts availability from multiple suppliers, ensuring that a locomotive wouldn't be sidelined waiting for custom components. The E5's exclusive design for Burlington meant specialized knowledge, unique parts inventory, and maintenance procedures that couldn't be shared with other railroads. What had seemed like a competitive advantage became an expensive complication in an industry moving toward standardization. Each new E-unit model incorporated lessons learned from previous designs, and the E5 suffered from being an early iteration in EMD's learning curve. The E5 shared the same early E-unit electrical architecture as its contemporaries, but its limited production meant fewer shop crews were familiar with its quirks compared to later, standardized E-unit models. Its traction motors couldn't match the performance of the improved designs used in later E-units. The locomotive's weight distribution, optimized for the relatively light consists of the late 1930s, proved less than ideal for the heavier trains that became standard after World War II. Burlington's own traffic patterns were changing faster than anyone had anticipated. The war had demonstrated that railroads could handle massive increases in both passenger and freight traffic, but it required more powerful, more reliable locomotives. The streamlined passenger trains that had seemed like the future in 1940 were sharing tracks with heavy freight consists and military trains that demanded different performance characteristics. The E5's design, optimized for pre-war lightweight streamliners, didn't align with the post-war reality of railroad operations. Shop crews at Burlington's maintenance facilities began expressing preferences for the newer E-unit designs. The E6 and E7 locomotives were easier to maintain, had better parts availability, and offered superior reliability in daily service. The E5's unique electrical configurations required specialized knowledge that wasn't always available at smaller maintenance facilities. Parts that were common on later E-units had to be specially ordered for the E5, creating delays and inventory complications. The locomotives spent more time out of service for routine maintenance than their newer counterparts, reducing their availability for premium services. Burlington's marketing department quietly shifted focus away from the E5. While the original Zephyr remained a powerful symbol in Burlington's advertising, the locomotives pulling the trains received less attention. Passengers cared about speed, comfort, and reliability, not the specific model of locomotive providing the power. As long as the trains arrived on time and the ride was smooth, the E5's role became invisible to the traveling public. The railroad discovered that raw horsepower mattered less than traction and reliability for their expanding network. Routes that had seemed perfect for lightweight, high-speed operation in the 1930s were now handling heavier consists with more passenger cars, baggage cars, and mail cars. The E5's power advantage over the original Zephyr became less relevant when newer locomotives could provide the same power with better traction characteristics and lower maintenance costs. The E5 ended up representing a brief transitional step between experimental streamliners and the standardized post-war power that defined American dieselization, but is now almost entirely forgotten. By the late 1940s, the E5 was being reassigned from premier services to secondary routes. The locomotives that had been designed to anchor the Zephyr network found themselves pulling local trains and filling in for more modern power when needed. This wasn't a dramatic demotion. It was a gradual fade from prominence as Burlington's fleet modernized around them. The Zephyr brand stayed iconic, but the E5 did not. While the original Pioneer Zephyr continued to capture public imagination and railroad historians' attention, the locomotive designed to replace it disappeared into operational obscurity. Burlington retired most E5s as newer E units took over the streamliner fleet, making the earlier models redundant rather than worn out. The scrapping process was unremarkable. Unlike the original Zephyr, which was preserved and eventually displayed at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, most E5 units were quietly sold for scrap metal when their service lives ended. There were no farewell tours, no special ceremonies, no recognition of their role in Burlington's streamliner history. They had become just another obsolete locomotive design in an industry that was rapidly modernizing. Only 2 E5 units survived into preservation, and even their stories reflect the locomotive's forgotten status. Most railroad enthusiasts can identify an E7 or E8 at a glance, but the E5's distinctive features, the specific proportions of its nose, the arrangement of its side louvers, the details of its stainless steel fluting, are known only to specialists. The locomotive built to carry the Zephyr legacy became a footnote. The Zephyr brand, meanwhile, lived on in ways the E5 never could. Burlington continued operating Zephyr-named trains well into the 1950s and beyond, with services like the California Zephyr becoming legendary in their own right. The Denver Zephyr maintained its prestige routing. The Twin Zephyrs continued serving the Twin Cities, and new Zephyr services were added to other routes. The public remembered the Zephyr name, the silver fluting, and the promise of modern travel, but they never connected those memories to specific locomotive models. The brand transcended the machinery, representing an idea of progress and modernity that could be applied to any sufficiently advanced train. Passengers boarding a Zephyr train cared about the destination and the experience, not whether an E5, E7, or E8 was providing the power. The Zephyr concept had become bigger than any single piece of equipment. The E5 had served its purpose, bridging the gap between the experimental Zephyr and the mature streamliner network that followed, but history had moved on without recording its contribution.